corporate training divisions. Mr. Ajay Bhagwat has special expertise of lean manufacturing. He spearheaded a program on implementation of lean manufacturing principles based on Toyota's standards of manufacturing in a large-scale seamless steel tube plants. The core objective was to improve quality and plant efficacy, continuous improvement, reduced waste, inventory, and costs. We welcome you, sir. Sir is going to deliberate on the methods for assessment and evaluation. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much. Should I share my screen now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I know that I have an hour here. I'll try to make use of it. And I think post the session, we may have some time for the questions and answers, right? But in the, I mean, anybody can ask a question anytime during this presentation. I would request the moderator to stop me if there are any questions to be addressed, right? So thank you very much. So I would like to actually talk about 4 important parts of this methods for assessment and evaluation. I would like to very briefly touch upon the rapid changes happening around us and how they impact the educational outcomes constantly. And then I would like to share some thoughts and ideas on importance of outcomes, instructions, and assessment alignment, followed by designing program level OBE. OBE is basically outcomes-based assessment. So I believe that a solid program design would lead to a systematic approach to outcomes-based assessment and evaluation. And then I would also share some ideas and thoughts about designing course level OBA blueprint. The word blueprint I'm using because primarily I'm thinking about how kind of this could be taken onto a drawing board, and then you design these various parts and assemble the whole program to be compliant with outcomes-based education environment. So the first here, the slide shows you, how the educational outcomes are getting impacted due to rapid changes happening around us. And we all believe that, we already know this, we all believe that by the time the students graduate, the outside world changes a lot. And then, we trying to cover the curriculum, which is by the time they graduate is kind of getting outdated, or most of the times. The industry continuously criticizes us, about students not being employable, and obviously they have their expectations constantly being communicated to educational institutions, and their expectations also are changing due to the changes happening out in the outside world, right? Likewise, my mindset of the students is also one of the major factors, and that affects the instructional design to a large extent. The way the assessments have to happen in the future, that is going to change a lot because of the mindset of the students who are born very recently, 5 to 10 years ago, and after 10 to 15 years, they will be in the higher education. And then you can imagine the kind of mindset the students will carry when they enter into higher education after a few days. Obviously, few years rather. The discussion that we are having here is not to just be considered for the current era. I would like to also extend this thought to further to 5 to 10 years from now, and then think about what readiness and preparedness higher education institutions may have to have. I'm pretty sure that all of you are also looking at it from the same perspective. The explosion of the data is also a big concern, and obviously the disciplinary knowledge that we typically deliver as a foundational knowledge for any discipline also has been shaking a lot. And because of the rapid explosion of the data, I mean, it is going to be extremely difficult to cover the sufficient amount of disciplinary knowledge delivery because it is changing very fast. Um, Shifting the skills is also one of the areas which is going to affect a lot in implementing outcomes-based education, in my opinion, because the more we think about the world that we are going to approach in the near future, uh, the skills related to affective domains such as and also some skills related to critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, learning to learn. These are going to be more, important than quite a few other psychomotor and affective, rather the cognitive skills that we currently focus our education on. So a lot of importance on affective domain is going to be the shift in the future, in my opinion, and that is why a rapid program design process, I would say the program designing process that you may have to employ for all your 150, 200 plus programs. As I understand, Sharda University has hundreds of programs running at a time, and naturally is going to be kind of every program it has to undergo changes every year. Every academic year, new courses will have to be introduced, and old courses may have to be revised, and then that is going to be a ever-going process, and which is obviously going to have huge impact on the outcomes-based education framework that you would come across with. It's obviously going to change a lot the moment a new academic batch begins, and that's why there has to be a very robust process in place to handle all these changes. So this shift in the competence is one of the key aspects that is going to impact generally the higher education, and because of that, the outcomes-based education. So we all know that agricultural age started somewhere in 18th century, and then psychomotor skills were more important at that time. Labor class was the social mobility at that time. In the industry age, during some 19th century, psychomotor skills started becoming important, and a supervisor kind of role emerged out of it. So the social kind of change at that time was related to be able to supervise labor force, and that was a skill to be acquired. In the information age, obviously, knowledge workers came in light, and they required deeper cognitive and affective domain skills to be able to work in that environment, and those kind of acquiring those skills became important progressively. What is likely to happen in the near future is going to be called as innovation age, and in which critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, and learning to learn is going to be more important. And that's why we may have to prepare the students for being able to do this. And obviously, the programs have to orient themselves towards these kind of requirements of the future. When it comes to outcomes-based assessment and outcome-based evaluation, I would like to share some ideas here in this section of the presentation, which you might find some disconnected, but I'm purposely doing that, and then going to build on top of this each of these ideas that I'm going to share here. So program education objectives, program outcomes, and the course outcomes. These are the three different levels of the outcomes that we constantly talk about. And their scope obviously changes, right? It is very broad, program level and course level. Now we have to slowly start thinking about where the outcome-based assessment comes in picture. Those who belong to the medical college and the health sciences education in Sharda University, they can also probably in their mind, I can see already that they must have already started thinking about how to relate competency-based medical education with this. But I'm pretty sure that you'll find some correlations and some similarities with this. So you can see that the kind of the life cycle of achieving these objectives and outcomes also has a difference in in the way they have to be taken up. And when you use program educational objective, probably you can define some kind of vision for a program. The outcomes of at the program level will help you design the curriculum. Likewise, course outcomes will help you prepare the lesson plans. And naturally, if we think about outcomes-based assessment and evaluation, the bottom right side part becomes important. So that is so when the teacher thinks about planning daily experiences, activities, and outcomes-based assessment, those will have to obviously address the course level outcomes. And so the scope of OBA and OBE obviously is at the level of the outcomes to be achieved at the course level. We obviously we don't here we are not talking about achieving the program level outcomes directly by OBA. It is going to be indirectly evaluated. When it comes to what should be assessed by the OBA and how, I would say that OBA requires specification of measurable and observable outcomes. The assessments may measure one or more outcomes at a time, because if it is a kind of essay type broad level descriptive question, obviously it is going to address multiple outcomes at a time, and you may have to have a rubric in place to assess the outcomes at that time. Another approach is to break down the individual course outcomes into cognitive processes and then assess them individually. This is also one of the ideas that we are going to go deeper into in next 15 to 20 minutes. In my opinion, a clear plan at each course level may be needed to decide which outcome should be assessed during the internal assessment and which should go to summative assessment. This is also, actually referred in many accreditation manuals also, and also in NAP 2020. And in fact, you will find that more emphasis is now being given on to formative assessments rather than assessments. And that is where, it is important for, it's a course file or course plan that we come up with, at the time of, at the start of the semester. We'll have to have, addressing these requirements of which question should be, rather which assessment should be taken at, and I should address what outcomes. When it comes to outcome-based evaluation, I would say that generally outcome-based education emphasizes great on continuous assessments. So more than different styles of teaching, outcome-based curriculum obligates a vastly different perspective and assessments. I'll come to that, what I mean by that. Formative assessments, it actually mandates continuous and formative assessments so that teachers can identify the stage of the learner and plan the remedial actions, if any. And that is why continuous assessment and formative assessments are very important from the perspective of outcomes-based education. In my opinion, autonomy to the teachers is very important. We may have to move a little or to, whatever extent possible from the very formal kind of, environment around the examinations. Because what is, in my opinion, what is required is a framework to the teacher to, as a guideline for, asking the questions to, in the internal assessments, which could be non-formal kind of assessments. But those are continuous assessment conducted by the teacher to assess the stage of the learners, basically, and plan the remedial action. So that is why smaller, quick assessments are required, which may not be part of the overall your kind of the term work. But here it is essential for the teachers to be able to quickly formulate some a few questions and conduct those kind of test assessments during the term anytime as per the requirements of the teacher, because the decision has to be taken by the teacher to see whether this is the right time for quickly assessing what the stage the learners are at, and then plan the remedial action. So that's why, to be able to plan that remedial action, some kind of assessments will have to be taken by the teachers, and that's why autonomy has to be given to them, and it has to be less and less formal environment around the examinations and assessment that is required there. It is also fitting very well into the concept of moving away from only the marks, and that is also discussed in LEP 2020. And what is being discussed more is if is related to the profile of the students, related to their competence and the outcomes, and that is why what here onwards probably the emphasis will have to be less on the orientation towards the marks, and deciding, basically qualifying or disqualifying the student based on those numbers, rather than, and that probably will be less important than measuring the outcomes. And that's why autonomy to the teachers is required, and less formal environment in assessment is required. So that is why now let's look at how these three things are related to each other: outcomes, instructions, and assessment, and their alignment is really, really important. If we think of a teacher, for a teacher, learning outcomes, when the teacher thinks about learning outcomes, the teacher asks the question, what do I want the students to know? How to do when they leave the course. Then the second question could be related to instructional strategies. What kind of activities in and out of class will reinforce my learning objectives and prepare students for assessment? And the third question the teacher may ask is, what kind of tasks will reveal whether students have achieved the learning objectives I have identified? And that is why, if we start answering this question, probably we come to a certain conclusions here. If assessments are misaligned with learning objectives or instructional strategies, it can undermine both student motivation and learning. This is why, this is how it is likely to happen. So if outcome is, let's say, outcome is learning to apply analytical skill, that's the outcome, and assessment measures only the factual recall, right? That is a mismatch there. So if the objective is for students to learn, apply analytical skills, but your assessment measures only factual recall, consequently, students hone their analytical skill when they study and are frustrated that the exam does not measure what they learned. So that's the misalignment there. Second example could be instructional strategies focus entirely on summarizing the argument of different authors, but assessment measures students' ability to compare and critique the argument of the different authors. So this is more complex scenario is given in the assessment. And that's why the assessment measures students' ability to compare and critique the argument of the different authors, but your instructional strategies focus entirely on summarizing the arguments of different authors. Consequently, students do not learn or practice the skills of comparison and evaluation that will be addressed. So that's why it is very, very important for outcomes and instructions and assignments or assessments are in sync with each other. And that's why it is a very, very crucial to have a very holistic approach, all-inclusive approach towards designing the program and plan the, obviously now program outcomes is going to be the starting point, and then how the overall curriculum design is done will have an impact on outcomes-based assessment and evaluation. Because all these small things matter a lot when it comes to outcomes-based education implementation. So how to get OBA and OBE. OBE is outcomes-based evaluation, right? So in my opinion, what you require, as I said, very dynamic and robust process around program designing is important. And top-down designing of program is a crucial step to achieve the outcomes-based education in general, and hence the outcomes-based assessment. A dynamic process which will constantly address the revisions in curriculum is required. Cognitive process, so this at times this becomes a little theoretical, but these are very powerful concepts, and cognitive research has been proved that these two things, dimensions like knowledge dimension and cognitive process, they become very important elements of developing the practices towards designing the assessments and the questions, and obviously even the program, complete program. And this blueprint of outcomes is also blueprint is outcome is it's a very fundamental, smallest kind of, I would say, a kind of piece of outcomes-based education. If for example, if there are 40 courses in a program, and if each course has, let's say, 10 outcomes to achieve, then obviously there are 400 outcomes we're talking about. So each outcome has to be linked with various parameters. Each outcomes has to be identified or given a special recognition with respect to the various dimensions, such as what knowledge domain of the this knowledge, skill, or affective attitude it is addressing, what topics it is addressing, likewise. So when it comes to top-down design approach of the program, we have to think about how the program outcomes are going to be achieved by the students. So then we think about the courses, then we think about the course outcomes, and then we think about assessments, whether what should be covered in formative and summative, likewise. And then designing of the question will require thinking about the cognitive process. Obviously, cognitive process is very famously known as Bloom's taxonomy, but Mr. Benjamin Bloom has introduced this thought, but it essentially it is Bloom's taxonomy. In ancient Indian philosophy also, you will find references to similar steps involved in learning, and I'm going to bring out one such reference in any way in a short while from now. As far as the cognitive process is concerned, which is the second most important aspect of getting the OBA right, is thinking about cognitive process, knowledge dimensions, and also the competencies. In CBME, they use Miller scale or Dreyfus scale to measure the competencies. A Dreyfus scale is nothing but it's a Likert scale from minimum to maximum kind of scale. It is typically used to measure the level of competence, or so I would say yes, level of competence. But these three things are required to come up with a solid program design. And this is the blueprint of the outcomes which I was referring to earlier. If I would take a course outcome 101.co1, you may have to find out what PO it is addressing, what topic it is addressing, subtopic it is addressing, what knowledge dimension it is addressing, what cognitive process should be used to assess this course outcome. How do you assess it? This is an assessment tool. What domain? It is a cognitive domain. Complexity, kind of, you have to have medium level complexity when you design the questions related to outcomes. You may drop this if you want, I mean, this is something that I thought introducing here, but right now I'm thinking that this may be a little outlier, not fitting here in the philosophy, but okay, you can have that. Type of questions also probably, descriptive or subjective, objective you want to have to assess this outcome, and type of assessment, formative or summative. So if you have a kind of a blueprint of each outcome like this, it will give extremely high level clarity to the teachers. And when it comes to releasing the kind of the shackles and the more formal nature of the assessments, then all you require probably is a framework given to the teachers within which they need to experiment, innovate, and deliver the teaching innovatively and creatively. So if that has to happen, obviously it can't be without any kind of rather boundaries. There will have to be little control on the process, and that's why a framework will have to be given, and that will help looking at each and everything with the right perspective. When you want to change or revise the outcomes-based education framework for each program, you know exactly what has to be changed and why the moment there is some change in the curriculum, right? And that's why you will require a very detailed orientation of towards of the rather I would say detailed orientation to the program designing. The mechanical engineers will relate this kind of thing with the bill of material for their engineering drawing. It is something similar to that. All the dimensions are required, with the gear, the fit, the sizes, the diameter, the thickness, the material, the properties. Everything is regular, right? It's a real word, and that real word has to be applied to the education process as well, which is quite required and it's doable. When it comes to now, let's talk about the other elements of OBA. We talked about the cognitive process, right? So knowledge dimensions, you must have already heard about these quite a few times. Factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive are the four dimensions of the knowledge. And factual knowledge captures discrete and isolated content elements, terminology, and knowledge of specific details and elements. Conceptual knowledge comprises classification and categories, principles and generalizations, and theories, models, and structures of concept. Procedural knowledge includes skills and algorithms, techniques and methods, as well as knowledge of criteria used to determine and justify when to do what within the specific domains and disciplines. And metacognitive knowledge encompasses strategic knowledge about the cognitive tasks, including contextual and conditional knowledge and self-knowledge. So these are the knowledge dimensions, and these are used already by us when we think about the categories of the program outcomes. You can find that there are three categories of the program outcomes, right? Knowledge, skill, and attitude. It is also called as behavior. And they are nothing but, knowledge belongs to cognitive domain, skill belongs to psychomotor domain, attitude belongs to affective domain. And these are the knowledge dimensions associated with these three categories. And if you look at the examples of the POs, you will realize that this kind of thought is already given by the educators and when they design the program outcomes, right? So you have to consciously design the program outcomes by thinking about how they are going to address these three domains of the skills that have to be achieved by the students when they finish the program. Without a thought about the knowledge dimensions, in my opinion, designing of the program outcomes is not possible. Mapping of the courses. Now, when we start thinking about the top-down approach of the program, then once we come up with the program outcomes which are falling into these three categories, factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive, then we have to think about what courses will have to be designed to deliver the requirements of those program outcomes. So you will have a set of courses to address the knowledge related program outcomes, right? Let's say PO1 and PO2. You may then start introducing application of the foundational knowledge or disciplinary knowledge that is learned or taught to the students in the initial foundational years, and then you will start introducing courses which will start addressing the procedural skill level POs and the metacognitive level POs like this. So that will be the combination and very consciously designed framework, the blueprint of the program, by considering first of all what program outcomes have to be achieved, and then followed by what courses it will have to have when we think about achieving those POs. So now, when we think about the cognitive process, as I mentioned to you, ancient Indian philosophers have already, also shared their thoughts about this. श्रवण करने की इच्छा, प्रत्यक्ष में श्रवण करना, ग्रहण करना, स्मरण में रखना, तर्क वितर्क, सिद्धांत निश्चय, अर्थ ज्ञान तथा तत्व ज्ञान, ये बुद्धि के 8 अंग हैं. Right? We can use this also a reference to our discussion about Bloom's taxonomy or cognitive process. However, Mr. Benjamin Bloom came up with a very nice idea and model of cognitive process, which is nothing but, when you think about those 6 steps involved in that, the first step is of knowledge retention. Unless and until the knowledge is retained, the next steps are unlikely to happen. And that's why it is called as remember corresponds to test of retention, whereas the other 5 categories correspond to tests of transfer. So this is how actually the transfer of the knowledge will happen, and the remaining 5 steps will occur. So this is the earlier session was devoted to this, so we don't have to really go into deeper. Miller scale is typically used in competency-based medical education, right? Which is similar to these cognitive process that we looked at earlier. However, it has got 4 levels: knows how, shows how, and does. So, however, when we think about teaching process, it is about delivering the knowledge of factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. When it comes to learning by the students, it is going to happen through this process of cognition, right? Remembering, understanding, and then obviously retention and transfer that is going to happen during this process. So, when it comes to identifying whether or not students have reached the desired level of either retention or transfer, then the questions are going to help the teachers to identify what level the students are at right now. Is it the desired level? If your blueprint given to you says that the students must be evaluated at the level of, let's say, apply. If you are delivering conceptual knowledge, and this CO is related to conceptual knowledge, and it has to be evaluated at the level of apply. And then when you, as a teacher, design the question, it will have to be designed such a way that it actually tests that apply level. Like otherwise, there is a misalignment of that we discussed earlier. So the question framing is very important, and that will have to be decided by looking at the blueprint of every outcome. And that's why blueprint is required, because it acts as a very solid reference to the teacher when they think about what kind of questions have to be asked. And that is going to give them and assess them as per the baseline that is designed by someone who is responsible for designing the program. And that is why outcomes-based assessment depends a lot on how well the program is designed. And so if you think about the program level blueprint of assessment, right? Here, I'm kind of using this metric here, rather metrics here. These are the 4 knowledge dimensions, and there are the 6 steps of cognitive process. So if I would look at the combinations here, right? There are 24 combinations here, which will have to be used by us when we think about outcomes-based assessment. And this is the this idea can be used by easily by the program designer to come out with a blueprint at the program level. And this blueprint is of assessment blueprint at the program level. It's a broader definition, and then you go to the course level, and then you go to the course outcome level. Step by step, we can easily use this as a guideline to go down deeper. Let's take an example of what kind of questions you would ask when you are targeting assessment of the students based on this combination. So you may say that list tools required for something. So it is just recalling and listing out the tools, right? That's the kind of question you will have to ask. But if you are asking some, factual and create level question, it could be, let's say, generate a log of, let's say, body temperature of one patient or maybe multiple patients, right? And then it is basically somebody who is going to design it and think about what structure of this log should be, and coming out with that, the readings. That kind of expectation will be set out there by asking a question related to create and factual. If you're talking about procedural and understand, you may ask a question like this: clarify why a sequence to be followed. It could be a process. So here, what is required here is basically the person will have to recall, first of all, what that process is, then start listing down the steps, and then probably coming out with the right sequence, optimized sequence maybe, right? And then we'll have to answer why that particular sequence has to be followed. And so it requires 4 to 5 different steps, and that's why it goes into the procedural level of questioning. Then if you look at create plus procedural kind of combination, then it goes into design, right? Creating something new. So that's why designing is the process of reaching the create level cognitive process. So naturally, a right keyword has to be used when you frame a question. Design and optimize process for something. So it is nobody earlier had thought about it, and the student is supposed to design it for the first time. It's nothing but creation. So there are many opportunities for designing the questions correctly by looking at these 24 different combinations here. These combinations will have to be used by the program designer to think about every course, and then plan, think about what knowledge the course is delivering, and then to what extent of the these cognitive process will have to be assessed by the for achieving the desired course outcomes of that course. That's the kind of blueprint or the framework the program designer will have to come up with. So now going one step deeper, let's take an example of factual and conceptual related courses here. If we have to think about what questions and assessments we have to think about, let's take example of, let's say, factual and remember level assessment is to be done by of the students. So you may use this as a keyword, list something which we have seen earlier, and questions like MCQs or true or false are good enough. That kind of question could be framed to achieve that. If it is let's say conceptual knowledge, and if you want to student assess at remember level, then you may say, okay, recognize something, and you may want to give a hint also that let's say let's say you would say that meter in the metric system, meter is something, right? That could be, so you in the metric system is the hint given to the student when you are framing the question. So that's the kind of hint has to be given when you are designing a question. When you are thinking about factual and understanding level cognition, then you may use summarize and say provide info and asking to summarize concept. So likewise, you can actually use various combinations to come out with questions related to outcomes-based assessment. Now, take this example. Now, let's look at procedural knowledge. And these are the courses which are delivering the procedural knowledge. So what kind of assessment you can think of? If you are thinking about procedural and remember, which is quite possible, okay, then if you are using list as one of the keywords, and if you are thinking about MCQ and true or false, that's a wrong approach. It is misalignment. What is required there is remember, recall, but you have to say that describe a process to solve a problem. For example, how to perform CPR. So the assessment tool changes when you are thinking about procedural knowledge. But if you still want to go for assessing the students at remember level, at that time, at least the question will have to be drafted such a way that it will help the student recall a kind of procedure that that's supposed to be followed for solving some problem. So these are kind of conscious efforts have to go into designing a blueprint of OBA at the program level. As we know that in earlier terms, semester, trimester, whatever, we deliver more factual and more conceptual and less procedural knowledge. And progressively, we start delivering more complex knowledge related to higher order thinking skill. And that's why the questioning and the level of cognition also has to be moved upwards from lower order thinking skill to the higher order thinking skill progressively during the period of their graduation from one semester to the other semester. So this is the idea that I wanted to depict to communicate you that you have to think about going from lower order thinking to the higher order thinking skills in the case of your questions related to knowledge category, questions related to skill category of the outcomes, and affective domain category of the outcomes. So this is one of the ideas I wanted to also to extend this further. When we think about designing the course level OBA blueprint, so far we talked about program level blueprint, and then we use some ideas generally to come out with different 24 combinations, and out of which is to be decided for what course is the question. How to decide what course level blueprint should be considered, or rather I would say when we think about those 24 combinations, how to decide what combination is good enough or appropriate for a course, how to decide that. Probably this idea which I want to present to you probably will answer that question. So if you kind of break down your course content into multiple topics and then identify what knowledge it is delivering, knowledge dimension, factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. That could be the one step that you can take. For example, this is the way you can identify various subtopics and topics delivered by your course and identify whether the knowledge is factual, conceptual, procedural, or metacognitive. So once you identify that, if you want to group them, if there are too many combinations, if you want to group them, you can group them into some kind of blocks. It could be called as some kind of area. It will have certain its boundary and little wider, but it will kind of bring together certain pieces, and it will kind of give certain block of the knowledge to the student, which can be called as knowledge block. And you can label that if you want, just to make it more readable and comprehensible. Then it can be named also. Here, this is the way you can do the knowledge blocks. There could be 15, 20 different knowledge blocks, doesn't matter. Like in my opinion, if you do more granular breakdown of your course and the content, better it is for the achieving the outcomes of the courses. If the course outcomes are broader statements, then actually when it comes to identifying the weaker students and planning the remedial actions, it is not easy actually, because you don't know exactly what went wrong and what has to be improved. So for that to happen, a couple of steps to be taken downwards to know the details of what the problem has been. And for that purpose, it is my suggestion is that do not unnecessarily control the number of course outcome statements to 5 or 6 or whatever, right? Let them be as many as possible. It becomes really easy for the teachers to identify the weaker students and then plan the remedial actions if the statements are granular. So once you come up with your knowledge blocks like this, then you can decide what cognition level you want the students to be assessed at. So recall our earlier discussion about those what level you want to be limited or you want to limit at when it comes to the expectations to be as far as the students are concerned, achieving the desired cognitive level. Because it's not possible actually to expect too much from every course, right? Although you know that you can extend the level of questioning to every time create level, but it doesn't mean that you create the complexity such a way that students are overburdened, and that should be avoided. We know that, right? It has to be a great balance, and hence initially for the probably during the time of conceptual knowledge is being delivered, disciplinary knowledge. At that time, probably you may want to limit it to remember, understand, apply. Sometimes you want to go to analyze also, but not too many questions. More focus on the lower order thinking skill, but progressively we have to move upwards, and that is the kind of some thought process kind of a decision table will have to be come up with. And that's why that earlier roadmap slide I had prepared to share some ideas about how progressively students could be taken from lower order to higher order thinking skills. And that reflection can come here then, right? For this particular course, you may want to limit the cognition level to these levels only. So the next is, once you a desired level of cognition is identified, and then you can decide what action verb you want to consider there, interpret or classify, right? Uh, you want to make, ask them to calculate something or implement something. These are the decisions to be taken to uh, see then how you are going to design your assessments, because these inputs will go to designing the questions. That's why thinking about the cognitive process is very important here. And this kind of input can come from models like this. This is designed by Iowa State University. This is licensed, the Creative Commons license, so I'm using it for my presentations here. So if you are delivering factual knowledge, and if you want to assess the students at understand level, typically these are the keywords you may want to consider in explain or infer, right? So this is how easily you can identify what is the right keyword to be used here, action verb to be used here, to draft your course outcome statements, as well as use that course outcome statement to draft the questions for your outcomes based assessment and evaluation. So this is a very useful, very simple to use kind of model, which can be also used by competency based medical education. They have to just tweak this with this Miller scale and knowledge dimension. They use you use basically the word there as you are also using actually the knowledge skills and affective domain communication is the fourth dimension used there. So that's how actually you can use it. If you want to consider metacognitive knowledge dimension to be assessed with the help of some other scale here instead of cognitive process, You can use this also: receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, internalization. This also could be one of the scales you can use. So based on that, you can actually come up with these action verbs. This is still at the course level, right? And then you can easily design your course outcome statements. If you use this combination, it can give you a course outcome statement very easily. So I know that a lot has been already discussed in your FDP, but I don't want to disturb the already kind of discussed ideas. But this also could be one of the inputs to refine your process or course outcome designing you can use. I'm pretty sure that it will be useful. So now this is the last slide. We are almost there now. So course level OBA blueprint is the most important aspect that has to come out after this discussion about program level blueprint, course level blueprint, designing the course outcome statement such a way that they give you a clear idea about what has to be assessed. And then we talked about the course outcome blueprint also. So this is the course outcome. Demonstrate the process of normalization with respect to database management system. If I have to now assess whether or not students are attaining this course outcome, I may have to design questions or assessments in this manner. I may come up with a question that says, summarize the problem that may occur without normalization. Or what is the need of the foreign key while normalizing the database tables? If I would go to the higher order thinking skill, find the attribute which could act as a composite primary key and why. So this is the way the matrix of the questions, then identifying what combination this question is assessing and what outcomes it is assessing. That's the detailed thought has to go into when you design the outcomes-based assessment. And I'm calling this process as course level OBA blueprint. And you will have a matrix like this for each course outcome. And that will complete your design of a program. In my opinion, unless and until such a detailed orientation is there, outcomes-based education cannot be implemented. Thank you very much.